haven't filmed for non-work purposes in so long that I am it might take me a minute to like not feel awkward, but I thought as like a sort of coming back video, I would just talk about some of the books that I have read recently that I have really enjoyed. So I've read most of these books over the last like few months, but yeah, how are you doing? So I'm filming in front of what is basically like my TBR shelf, and I mean honestly I actually have like 6 TBR bookshelves, but this is the one you might recognize from my Tumblr. Try to get this bookshelf in here because I love it so much. I love my lamp and I love my plant, and so I'm just going to talk about these in no particular order, I guess. I have a couple of series and then of standalone books, and an okay mix, I think, of like fantasy type stuff and then more literary fiction. So the one that I have read most recently is River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty, and this is kind of difficult to talk about because it's part of a series. It is a bunch of like short stories, like deleted scene type things from the Daevabad trilogy, which is like one of my absolute like all-time favorite fantasy series. I just adore it so much. I love all the characters. There's like one tiny thing, like if I were to email her, hey, do you take constructive criticism, then there is definitely something at the end of the series that I was not like the biggest fan of, but whatever, it's fine. I kind of put this off for a little bit because I was concerned that the thing that I didn't like about the trilogy would be emphasized here, and it was at the end a little bit, but that's okay. I just like glanced at that page and then like moved on with my life and just I'm gonna pretend it doesn't exist. But I really enjoy this. I think if you like this series, I would recommend reading it like immediately after you read the original trilogy, or even if it's possible, read it while you are reading the trilogy. Like at the beginning of each chapter, she does have a note about where this would fit into the regular chronology, which is really nice. And so I would recommend reading it that way, just because a lot of these scenes I had, like, it took me a second for my memory to come back and basically like situate myself within like the larger plot. Characters I was fine with, like I remembered all the characters because I love them so much. And this definitely emphasized the side characters a lot more than like the main. I would say like, you know, our main 3 characters they kind of took a backseat in this one. Didn't like it, I think, just because of the nature of this, because it is a bunch of like disconnected short little scenes. I didn't enjoy it as much as the original trilogy, but I think if all of these stories had appeared in it, I don't think it would have been any lesser, like, or any less enjoyable. So first series I'm going to talk about here is, what is this series even called? I don't know what this series, like the name of this series, but A Marvelous Light. I read this last year, and then this year I just read A Restless Truth by Freya Marski, and when is this? Like Victorian, and everybody's gay, like everybody's queer in some way. So in this world, magic exists, but it's not like very widely known about. People who can do magic do generally try to like keep it hidden from the rest of society, and this first book follows Robin and his sort of like solving this sort of mystery. I guess if I were to like make it, you know, add some like little buzzwords to try to describe the series, it would be like queer, historical, magical romps. That's how I would describe both of these. But the first book follows Robin and his story, and then the second book follows his sister. But yeah, the second one follows Maud, and it's sort of a more contained story on a ship. But I really enjoyed both of them. I think if you're looking for something that has like pretty decent world building but is not overwhelming, then this might be a good option. Now, last year I read The Manning Tree Witches by A.K. Blakemore, and this I know I've talked about this online briefly when I had my end of year like tag meme post thingy going around, but this book really surprised me with how much I enjoyed it. So this is about a witch trial basically, and the women who, you know, it kind of follows like the same like typical beats that you would expect. So you have a group of women who are you know, some of them are supporting each other and some of them are maybe being a little backstabby and sort of grabbing power for themselves by throwing other women under the bus, basically. So it follows a lot of those same, like, similar kind of plot beats that you might see in other books about witch trials. This one takes place, when is it? It's like really long. 1643. So it's 1643 in England, and it's actually funny. It's really well written. You feel like you're in that time period, but at the same time there's a lot of like snark in this, and I love that because it's relatable, because you know, the people had a sense of humor and they gave each other shit and they had fun, you know, like all of those kinds of things that we do now like see as normal because we're just, you know, people living our lives. I love when those kinds of details are put into historical fiction, and especially in something like this where I think it's quite easy to make it very like dark and hopeless. I really liked the overall feeling of this book, though. The writing was really great. Next series I want to talk about is A River Enchanted. What is the name of this series? I'm not very good at like remembering the names of series. I don't know. Anyway, so this is A River Enchanted, and then also A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross, and I got the Illumicrate versions, which have this beautiful art and everything in the end papers, but I love this so much. Similar to actually the other series that I've talked about so far, it does a really great job of creating this world that is understandable and it's rich, but it's not overwhelming. So this takes place on a magical island where it's divided in half basically, and you have people who use magic and can work with magic, but it costs them something. And then you have people who cannot. You also have people, you know, who have plenty of food and resources and everything. And then you have like the group of people who are struggling to get by. And so there's this very clear divide with the island, and you follow Jack, who is a bard, and Adara, who is the heir to the royal family of this one half of the island. And it's very like magical and whimsical, and the characters, even though, I mean, I love when an author can make you invested in a relationship that like already exists. Like the two of the other main characters are a married couple, and they're, you know, married by the time already before the series starts, but even though you don't get to see them getting together and all of that, you're still like very, very invested in their relationship and in them as individual characters. They each have like a very clear role and stake in this world, in this story. And so I just really enjoyed this. I don't want to be too spoilery or anything, but I also just had a very like positive vibe. It's hard to put my fingers on exactly why or how I got this vibe from this series in particular, but I had like a very positive sense or like feeling while I was reading it, and so it felt like I was in good hands, if that makes sense. I felt like Rebecca Ross was not the kind of author who was going to emotionally manipulate me or like do something shocking just for the audience impact, rather than because it was organic to the story. So that was a nice feeling like when you're in the author's hands, they're like, you trust them as an author not to screw you over as the reader. The last two books I want to talk about are, they're more like on the literary fiction side. So the first one is The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki, and this won the Women's Prize for Fiction last year, and I had never read anything by Ruth Ozeki before. This was really well written and intriguing, and I love the characters. For being such a long book, I don't really remember a lot about the plot, honestly. It focuses on a woman and her son, and when he's a young boy, when he's, I want to say like 7 or 8, his father is killed in an accident, and the story really picks up there with this woman and her son having to deal with the repercussions and like sort of how they deal with the grief of that event. But like underlying all of that narrative, underlying like the actual story, is this commentary on not even a commentary, just sort of an examination of objects and things and what role they play in our lives and how we can maybe express ourselves, or, you know, express our emotions, or how our emotions can impact the way that we interact with and engage with objects. And that sounds very lofty, but I just mean like the mother in this story becomes a hoarder and the boy in the story can hear objects. They're not really talking to him, they're just sort of saying things as if nobody's listening, or, you know, just into the void of the universe, but this boy can hear them. And so he starts getting into some trouble at school because, you know, he doesn't want to hear the objects. So he'll do things like he'll put headphones on, or he'll like intentionally not listen to people because otherwise he can hear all of these objects like screaming at him at the same time. So there's multiple things going on in this book. We have this mother and this son dealing with grief and the loss of the father. We have the mother who becomes a hoarder at the same time as she's reading this sort of like Marie Kondo-esque book about decluttering and, you know, having a better relationship with objects, at the same time as her son can hear all of these objects expressing themselves and sometimes causing him to do things that he doesn't actually want to do. So this was, like I said, I honestly don't remember a whole lot about the plot of this book because despite being a chunk of a book, there wasn't that much going on in terms of like, you know, a story being built up and then a climax and then a denouement and all that stuff. Like that was not as much of a feature, but like I mentioned before, I read a lot of slow books. I like a slow book. I often do not give a crap about plot. Like plot who? All I want to know is how these characters are feeling a lot of the time. So I really enjoyed this. I do have her other book, A Tale for the Time Being. Reading this definitely made me more excited to read A Tale for the Time Being. Okay, last book that I'm going to talk about is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. And this is by far the darkest, weirdest of not only of this stack here that I've been talking about, but one of the darker books that I've read in quite a while. So this is about Irina, who is a photographer. She's 28 and she went to a fine arts school in London. And it's her art is, it's debatable. So she tends to take pictures of men that she just like randomly meets on the street, in the subway, in the grocery store. And she takes these pictures of them. So she's supposedly like very beautiful, she's very thin, so that's actually a trigger warning or a content warning for anybody who needs to know those things. There are quite a few for this book, but she's beautiful, she's thin, she's white, she's unassuming, or at least people think that of her. And so she has a pretty easy time convincing like random men to come back to her house and take very, very compromising, exploitative pictures of them is basically like the premise in terms of plot. Now, what this book is actually about is about Irina's sort of need for control, her attempts to assert dominance over men, and not just men, but just over people in her life, and her desire to be seen as significant, I suppose. I think that's probably a good way to say it, because she wants to be seen. I mean, she does at one point literally say she wants to be seen as a threat to other people. She wants them to, you know, react negatively to her, but they're not looking close enough, really, in order for that to actually happen. Instead, they see her body, you know, like how skinny she is, or they see her like for how beautiful she is, or they hear her accent and they think that they know everything about her social class. They hear about where she went to school, where she grew up, you know, like what her parents were like, all of these things, like her race and her class, gender, like all of these things are used to define her against her will, really. So she tries to embrace that, and even when she embraces it, it doesn't go exactly the way that she wants. So like I mentioned, there are a lot of trigger warnings for this book. So just warnings for like, there's very graphic violence in here. She talks about her weight a lot. What else? There's also some sexual violence that occurs in here in multiple multiple different ways. Also a lot of substance abuse, if that is something that you're, you know, keeping an eye out on. So those are the books that I have read recently. We'll see how editing this goes. I don't know. Also, I don't even know if I'll post this. This just took 20 minutes to film, and that's not bad, but I feel also like I was rambling a lot. I had no real structure, but there we are. There we are. I'm hoping to get back into the habit of this and record videos like fairly regularly, like once a week maybe. We'll see how it goes. I have big plans for 2023 in many, many different ways, and so we'll see how they go. I don't know. Anyway, bye. Should this be my thumbnail?